How to Create a Glitch Monologues Season 34 Chapter 5. This is Season 34 of How to Create a Glitch in the Matrix Monologues Episode 5. In this episode, we will be reconceptualizing what I have previously described as hybrid consensual states and non-consensual states. In most apparently democratic countries, there are at a minimum two narratives within the framework of the media. These dialectical narratives affirm impulses which correspond to a particular block within society and negate impulses which correspond to the other block. In a dual narrative society, blocks are typically dialectical in nature. Thus, in any country where the affirmational narratives are divided into set media narratives, the society is ultimately polar, in the sense that the number of distinct dialectical narratives represent the number of poles in the society. For example, where there is a left or progressive versus right or conservative dichotomy, which prevails in the popular media, the state is bipolar. Where are other factions, 3, tripolar, 4, tetrapolar, etc. This is important because each dialectical faction produces dissonant consensualities in the space which corresponds to the impulses they negate. Now, what does this mean in practice? In a bipolar society, the narratives of one block will generate dissonant consensualities through their consumption by members of the other block. These impulses will be appropriated according to social reinforcement, that is, by the block which affirms the corresponding impulses. In a bipolar society, therefore, the agents of the state may cause dissonant consensualities to form in their encounters with members of society who do not conform to the consensus of the two blocks. Now, non-consensual states are fundamentally polar. That is to say, that the media narrative is consistent with the action of the state, which means that the state decides fundamentally what to affirm and negate. This means that all dissonant consensualities form through the intersection of members of society with the agents of the state. You can call this kind of a dissonant space as Kafkaesque syndrome in the spirit of his novel The Trial. Which is to say, that dissonant consensualities will form predominantly through the inconsistencies or breakdown in the unanimity of the state as the sole design of the media narrative. In other words, societal consensus determines the generation of dissonant consensualities in a non-polar state. In a polar state, the agents of the state determine the generation of dissonant consensualities. Now, what does this all mean practically? The tonic-dominant relationship compels the dominant to act out the impulses of the tonic. There will be a tendency when both sets of narratives coincide for the tonic-dominant relationship to become bipolar. When a single set of narratives subsist in the intentions of the tonic-dominant relationship becomes polar. By this language, what I mean is, a bipolar tonic-dominant relationship produces flipping of the relationship fairly periodically. A polar tonic-dominant relationship on the other does not flip as often. In other words, the tonic-dominant relationship becomes a reflection of the overall polarity of the society in which it resides. Ultimately, social convention will be governed in a multipolar state by the consensus between the power blocks and their corresponding narratives. Since social convention often becomes the backdrop for the formation of dissonant consensualities, this makes sense, both in encounters with the dialectical narrative and the agents of the state. Now, if we take a larger view, and look at the action not of individual states, but global powers, we must first make a distinction. Fundamentally, the problem is dualism as a whole, in that, the aligning of power blocks from disparate states produces the same organization as within states. If the left in every country aligns, it tends to produce a bipolar world, which becomes a macrocosmic reflection of the bipolarity of the individual states. If we wish to go beyond dualism as the foundational function of global power, the mechanism to do that is to segregate power blocks state by state. To recognize that fundamentally the left in one state has no parallel with any other. But the problem with this is that the consensus of international order, like the conventional consensus within a state, governs interactions between agents of each state. Bipolar states will always desire to produce an international order which reflects bipolarity, because it starts at its base with the particular formulation of the tonic-dominant relationship. Power blocks will be compelled to agglomerate into polar groupings through the torsion created by the consensus within each power block. But likewise, polar states cannot generate multipolar worlds. The aggregation of power into a single block doesn't lend itself to the formation of a multipolar international order. But it does have one advantage, namely the segregation of power within the bounds of state lines. But without some consensus for agents of each state to formulate dialogue, there is no conventionality, no consensus of international behavior. It's a difficult problem. To this author, it appears the only solution lies with the elimination of dualism as a way of thinking and societal organization. Other examples are provided by states which manage well through coalitions of political blocs, lending themselves towards an organization which is fundamentally tripolar and tetrapolar, etc. But the underlying issue is that such states may need to adopt unique formulations of family structure to abide by their societal conformations. That's the end of the podcast for today. If you enjoyed it, please like, comment and subscribe.